Living in the Victorian era, a journey through the streets, homes, and mines of 19th century England, the veil of dawn still covered London, a grey, damp shroud that stretched over the chimneys which, soon, would spew smoke. It was 5 in the morning. The silence, heavy and icy, was merely a momentary illusion, about to be shattered by the first gasps of a city that, even in slumber, never ceased to dream and to struggle. Far from the capital, in the industrial heart of Manchester, the day had already begun for the Davies family. There were no golden-handed alarm clocks in their two-room house, only the relentless urgency of survival. The air, within that small refuge, was a suffocating mix of cold, dampness, and the persistent smell of coal. Thomas Davies, his 45 years marked by fatigue, coughed, a dry, hoarse sound that seemed to echo the very harshness of life. Beside him, Sarah, his 42-year-old wife, still slept a light, restless sleep, with Arthur, their 8-year-old youngest, nestled between them, seeking the scarce warmth. Lily, their 14-year-old daughter, was already on her feet. Her movements were quick, almost mechanical, as she dressed in the darkest corner of the room. There was no time for hesitation or the luxury of a gradual awakening. The factory called Sarah, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 mornings, lit the coal stove. The acrid, dense smoke filled the room before finding its way out, a prelude to the air that would soon saturate the streets. Breakfast was a ceremony of subsistence. Stale bread, perhaps some watery oatmeal that barely had any taste, and weak, almost colorless black tea. Water, a precious commodity, was brought from a communal pump in the street, and hygiene was a minimal ritual. A quick wash of face and hands with cold water, a shock that awakened more than any cup of tea. Thomas and Lily's work clothes were the same as yesterday's, patched and imbued with the factory smell. There was no dignity of a clean uniform, only the practicality of worn fabric that offered some protection against the cold and dirt. The lifespan of a garment was measured in years of continuous use, not in fashion seasons. By 6 in the morning, they were already on the streets, shadowy figures blending into the silent crowd of workers heading to the factories. The distant sound of factory sirens was a metallic lament, the call to another day of exhausting labor. The air was heavy with soot, the smell of coal, and the promise of a day just like the last. The streets, dark and poorly lit by sparse gas lamps, were a carpet of mud, rubbish, and debris, where every step was a battle against darkness and filth. Meanwhile, miles away, in a more affluent London neighborhood, the Sterling family home awoke in a very different manner. Here, the day began with the discretion and efficiency of a well-trained staff. Martha, the 16-year-old maid, had been up for hours. Her day had started before dawn, lighting the fireplaces, ensuring each room was warm before her employers even thought of rising. She had prepared hot water for bathing and morning tea, a silver tray with fine porcelain cups and delicate biscuits, which now rested on the bedside table in Mr. and Mrs. Sterling's room. The hierarchy was clear, almost palpable. The employers slept, the servants worked. Mr. Arthur Sterling, a successful 50-year-old merchant, awoke to the gentle smell of burning coal and the discreet clinking of cups. He picked up the Times, the morning newspaper, while Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, his 45-year-old wife, began to prepare for the day. Hot water for bathing was brought in copper basins, and hygiene was an elaborate ritual, with perfumed soaps and fine-bristled hairbrushes. Dressing was a statement of status. For Mrs. Sterling, it was a lengthy and meticulous process, requiring Martha's help to tighten the corset until her waist was almost painfully narrow, and to arrange the layers of petticoats in the main dress. The corset, though uncomfortable, was a symbol of femininity and respectability, a social armor. For Mr. Sterling, the dark suit and tie were the armor of the businessman, impeccable and formal, ready to face the world of profits and negotiations. With the sun higher, Victorian England burst into full activity. Cities, large and small, were cauldrons of energy, work, and life, each with its own rhythm and its own pains. In the factory, the pace was relentless. Thomas and Lily worked side by side with hundreds of others, under the watchful eyes of the foreman. The deafening roar of the weaving machines was a constant din that seemed to swallow every thought. The air was heavy with cotton, lint, and dust, and the smell of oil and sweat was a constant presence, permeating clothes and skin. Lily, with her small, agile fingers, operated a weaving machine, her movements quick and mechanical, but her face pale and tired. Thomas carried heavy bales of cotton, his muscles protesting with every movement. There were no conversations, only the incessant sound of the machines and the harsh orders of the foreman. A minor accident, a crushed finger, a muffled scream, the work did not stop. Shifts were long, often 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, with minimal breaks for a quick meal. Accidents were common, and safety was a secondary concern. Production was the priority. Children like Lily, and even younger, were employed for their agility and because they were cheaper, crawling under machines to fix threads, exposing themselves to constant dangers. Childhood, for most, was an unattainable luxury, replaced by early and brutal toil. Back at the Sterling home, breakfast was a social and nutritious event. The family gathered in the dining room, served by Martha and another maid. The table was impeccably set with fine porcelain, silver cutlery, and a variety of foods: eggs, bacon, toast, jams, tea, and coffee. Sunlight streamed gently through the windows, illuminating the room. Mr. Sterling read the newspaper, while Mrs. Sterling oversaw the meal, and Eliza, their 18-year-old daughter, chatted animatedly with John, their university student son, about a book she was reading. For Mrs. Sterling, the morning was dedicated to managing the household. She supervised the servants, planned meals, checked food stocks, and organized correspondence. The middle-class Victorian home was a complex machine, and the wife was its main gear, ensuring everything ran with clockwork precision. Elisa, the daughter, devoted herself to activities considered appropriate for a young lady: reading, music, embroidery, and preparing for her future role as wife and mother. Her education focused on domestic and social skills, although some more progressive women were beginning to seek more formal studies. John, the son, was immersed in his university studies, a privilege few could enjoy. After breakfast, Mr. Sterling left for his fabric shop. The streets of London were a spectacle in themselves, a microcosm of Victorian society. Carriages, horse-drawn cabs, and double-decker omnibuses dominated the traffic, and noise and olfactory pollution were constant. He walked with his cane, greeting other merchants, passing a vibrant street market where hawkers offered everything from fresh flowers to newspapers. Child shoeblacks tried to earn a few pennies, their thin voices blending into the city's hum. Life on the streets was a whirlwind of activity, where wealth and poverty met and ignored each other, separated by an invisible chasm. The city's architecture reflected the grandeur of the British Empire, with imposing buildings and well-maintained squares. But behind this facade lay a reality of overcrowding and precarious sanitation for the majority of the population. Midday marked a brief pause for some, but for many, work continued unabated. The Victorian afternoon was a reflection of responsibilities and social divisions. In the factory, lunch was a quick and unceremonious break. Thomas and Lily ate what they had brought from home: bread, perhaps a piece of cheese or salted meat, and water. There were no canteens, just the factory floor or a dusty corner. Sitting together, they ate in silence, the fatigue visible on their faces. Conversation was minimal. The only concern was to regain some energy for the hours of work still to come. The food was simple, but essential to maintain the physical strength required by the toil. At the Sterling home, lunch was lighter, but still a complete meal. Mrs. Sterling and Eliza might receive visits from other ladies of society for tea and conversations about social events, fashion, and gossip. Social visits were a pillar of middle and upper class life, a time to maintain appearances, strengthen social ties, and, for young women, perhaps find a suitable suitor. Etiquette was strict, and every gesture and word was carefully weighed. Meanwhile, John might be in his university classes or in the library, deepening his knowledge. Younger middle-class children would have lessons with a governess or attend private schools, learning Latin, Greek, mathematics, and good manners, preparing for a future of privilege. Back in the working-class neighborhood, Arthur, the youngest of the Davies children, spent the afternoon in the streets. There were no schools for him, or if there were, the family could not afford the costs or the loss of his help at home. He played with other children, often amidst rubbish and dirt, with makeshift toys, a metal hoop pushed with a stick, a ball of tied rags. They looked dirty, but childish joy still shone in their eyes, a small miracle amidst adversity. Sarah, at home, had an equally exhausting routine. Washing clothes was a Herculean task, without machines or running water. She boiled water on the coal stove, scrubbed clothes in a tub, wrung them out by hand, and hung them to dry in any available space. In addition, there was house cleaning, dinner preparation, and caring for the younger children. The fight against dirt and disease was constant. A lack of basic sanitation, overcrowding, and poor nutrition made diseases like cholera, tuberculosis, and typhoid epidemic. Life expectancy in working-class neighborhoods was drastically lower than in wealthier areas, a silent sentence imposed by poverty. As the sun dipped to the west, the city prepared for night. For some, it was the end of a long day's work. For others, the beginning of social life. Finally, the factory sirens announced the end of the shift. Thomas and Lily, their bodies aching and minds exhausted, made their way back home. The silence that followed the deafening factory noise was almost as oppressive as the noise itself, an emptiness that allowed fatigue to settle deep within. At home, Sarah awaited them with dinner. The meal was simple, but warm and comforting: a thin soup or a vegetable stew with a little cheap meat. If available, it was the only time the family gathered, sharing the few words they had left after such a hard day. Arthur, the youngest, might tell of his street games, a brief glimpse of innocence amidst the harshness. The night was short. There was no time for leisure or entertainment. After dinner, the family prepared for sleep, huddled together in the few available beds, seeking the rest needed to face another day, just like the last. Hope was a luxury. Survival was the goal. For the Sterling family, the evening was the pinnacle of social and family life. Dinner was a formal meal, with several courses elegantly served by the maids. The table, lit by candles and gas lamps, was a stage for lively conversations about politics, literature, travel, and the week's social events. Mr. Sterling discussed business, John spoke of his studies, and Eliza demonstrated her social skills, a prelude to her future in high society. After dinner, the family retired to the drawing room. Mr. Sterling might read the newspaper or a book. Mrs. Sterling embroidered or oversaw correspondence. Eliza played the piano or sang, and John devoted himself to reading. It was a time of culture, comfort, and companionship, a refuge from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. The servants, however, continued to work. The kitchen was cleaned, dishes washed, fireplaces stocked for the next morning. Their work only ended when their employers retired to bed, a silent and invisible routine. For those who could afford it, the night offered entertainment: theaters, operas, concerts, balls. For the working class, pubs were the main refuge, a place to forget the day's hardships with a pint of ale and some boisterous conversation. But the dark streets also hid dangers. Crime was high, and poverty drove many to despair. The Victorian night was a mosaic of lights and shadows, of luxury and misery, where beauty and brutality coexisted side by side. As night deepened, Victorian England settled down, but people's minds continued to work, to dream, to fear, and to hope. In the Davies home, sleep was a welcome but often restless refuge. Aching bodies, minds worried about tomorrow. The darkness brought brief relief from reality, but also the uncertainty of the future. Thomas coughed in his sleep. Sarah turned, embracing Arthur, seeking and offering comfort. Lily slept deeply, exhausted. The silence was broken only by the sounds of the night and, perhaps, the distant whistle of a train, a reminder of a world that moved relentlessly. They slept, huddled together, seeking warmth and security. Their dreams, if any, were simple: a day without pain, enough food, a future a little less uncertain. Victorian life for them was a daily battle for survival, where each dawn was a new test of resilience. In the Sterling home, retiring for the night was a ritual of comfort. Mrs. Sterling was helped by Martha to undress from the complex layers of her attire. She sighed with relief as the corset was loosened. Martha quietly left, leaving the couple to their privacy. Mr. Sterling might read a little more before sleeping, reflecting on business and his family's future. For them, the night was a time for reflection and planning. Their dreams were of continued prosperity, of a good marriage for Eliza, of success for John. Financial security and social status were pillars of their existence, and the concern was to maintain and elevate them. The Victorian mind, whether that of an exhausted worker or a prosperous merchant, was a cauldron of hopes and fears, ambitions and resignations. A world of stark contrasts, where faith and progress clashed with harsh social reality. And so, the Victorian day came to an end, a day that for millions was a battle for survival, and for others, a routine of privilege and responsibility. 19th century England was a stage for radical transformations. The Industrial Revolution changed the landscape and people's lives forever. The British Empire expanded, and science and technology advanced by leaps and bounds. But behind the progress and grandeur, there was a reality of abyssal social inequality, inhumane working conditions, and a morality that often masked hypocrisy. The Victorian era left us a complex legacy, the foundations of the modern world, but also the scars of a society in profound transition. By living, even for a day, the routine of these people, we realize that history is not just about dates and grand events, but about real life, daily challenges, and the minds of those who came before us. The Victorian era, with all its contradictions, teaches us much about human resilience, the pursuit of progress, and the complexities of social justice. May this journey help us look at our own time with a new perspective, valuing what we have and reflecting on what we still need to build.